Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Constructed Criticism. I'm your host, Spencer, and I'm joined by some new co-hosts, Trey McLaren.
Hey, everybody.
I'm not saying your name right.
No, you did. McLaren, that's it.
All right. I don't know if that's what I said, but I tried really
That's
hard.
close enough. You didn't say like McLaren or McLaren or any of the other stuff that I normally get, or add a bunch of letters like McClanahan. I get a bunch, so you're in the ballpark.
Yeah, McLean is how you say it, correct?
All right. We're also joined by Mason.
What's up, amigos? How you doing?
So, I think we should start by explaining to those what's happening. And I'd kind of like to just... Yeah, there's already a post that went up yesterday or 2 days ago for you, those of you listening, that that John and Seth were leaving the show, and it was something that I knew was coming, not in the way that I knew that like Michael Hinderocker was going to work at Wizards of the Coast, and like I needed to get somebody, and I had time to like get John and Seth and stuff like that. This was like John was going to quit Magic before he even did the show. I needed to have a really good year. And John hasn't debuted a Pro Tour this year. So John texted me that he was going to quit Magic, and that the next Pro Tour would be his last Pro Tour, but he wouldn't be like prepping very much, and he was unhappy with Magic and not wanting to do a podcast about Magic. And then Seth, when he agreed to join the show, there was no MPL. And there was no MPL League, and there was no MPL streaming, and as they announced the MPL League finally, Seth is like, I don't know if I have time to do this and all of my other commitments right now. And it was like, okay, that's totally fine. I've always said that like especially for John, right? Like the most important thing to me is that my co-hosts want to do this and want to be playing Magic. Nobody wants to do a podcast about something they hate. And so with where John was feeling in Magic right now, like it made a lot of sense for him to go. And with Seth, he was really doing me and John a favor, and I didn't want to hold him to any obligation to do that if he needed to do other things. So I wish John and Seth a ton of luck. It was extremely amicable. They both tweeted about it. They both really enjoyed doing the podcast. And so, I think for both of them, it was a little bit sad because they were connecting with the listeners and trying to, build this thing with me. And John and I had become really good friends, and I've just become a fan of Seth's. And I really wish Seth a lot of luck in the MPL. I hope our listeners continue to wish him luck and support him. And for John and whatever he picks doing, I probably said this all a lot better in the post, which you can find on constructedcriticism.com. But we've got one-time top 8 competitor in states, Trey McLaren, for Magic the Gathering. Two-time state champion Spencer Howland, and 0-time top 8 states competitor Mason Clark to fill in for them.
I mean, there's no one more qualified. I don't know how you could have found anyone.
No. So that's what I want to say from my end on this. I'm really excited about it. As far as picking new co-hosts, I'll just talk about you two really quickly if I can.
Oh gosh.
So it was really funny. Mason tells the story to others as though he knew this was going to happen a lot longer ago, but one thing that I learned in the last couple of months, probably the last 2 or 3 months, is just really what I wanted the show to be about and what I want the show to be moving forward. And so when I looked for replacements for that, I wanted people that I thought would have a lot of fun doing the show, but also that wanted to improve the Magic community around them, that wanted to help players get better at Magic, and that wanted to learn along with the listeners. So many people, including myself, love having Seth on the show. One of the things that people said that they missed about Michael and Matt was the relatability, that something that they saw as attainable and something that they could go along with if they were a silver pro or if they were a bronze pro trying to get silver. And so I think that when I thought about people I wanted, I had opened up myself to people who might even consider, playing more SCGs recently. Um,
At me next time.
no, that's not. That's not. I'm not saying that as a bad thing, but like,
I'm just joking with you, buddy.
but before I was really focused on, I wanted people that wanted to play Grand Prix, I wanted to qualify for the Pro Tour, and what I'm realizing with like Arena and with the State of Magic, I just want people who are gonna really want to help the listeners improve at Magic, and because of that, there were some people that I thought of. If I reached out to you, I know a lot of you are listening. It means that I legitimately wanted to do the show with you. Like it was not a, it was very much a I want this, and I need to make a tough decision when the time comes. Uh, and the time came, and I had one meeting, and it was with these two, and I think a text thread before things even started. Mason and I were texting each other, and I think in that text thread, both of us said I 100% agree twice with what the other person was saying. So like alignment was so there, and so I'm really happy with this, and I'll let you two go and speak to your listeners also.
Trey, fire away first. Age before beauty.
Oh, well, then when will you talk?
After you. That's how I just his memory's already going. Is it too late to get a different person? I think Kling is still available.
No, this is an exciting opportunity. We're happy to be here on CC. It was a decision that we didn't take lightly. This is a show that we've been really lucky to be on the network with and to have a relationship with Spencer, as we've been doing the Even Odds podcast, and that making the decision to step away from that and come to CC was because the goals were so aligned with what it is that we were trying to do anyway. What it is that we want to talk about Magic. We want to make content. We want to have fun doing it. We want the listeners to have fun doing it. And we want to be able to, reach as many people as we can and to help as many people as we can as we all try to grow together. And that this seemed like the best opportunity, right now for us to be able to do that. And it seemed to align with the direction that Spencer wanted the show to go. And, he wanted a little nonsense for the CC. So I'm always available to do that.
I was going to say, that's why Trey's here, everyone.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, he brings years and years and years of experience and nonsense. So
yeah, definitely that. Yeah. For example, the states that Spencer was talking about was 2009, and still my favorite playmat of all time.
Oh gosh, that's a story for another day. Yeah, no, it really is. It's surreal and an honor to be tapped, as it were, and to get even just the interview and then to be here now. When I first started wanting to play Magic competitively, I found CC pretty quickly, and I had done content for another game I used to play really competitively, Cardfight Vanguard, back in the day.
Are you a state champion of that?
Multiple, yes.
You're just clearly better at that game.
Yeah, I am definitely better at Vanguard at my peak than I am at Magic. Not close. But hope to be better one day. Regardless, though, I was doing content in it when I found Spencer's show. It was like, it felt like my content, but in the like Magic context. And I was like, wow, and I really connect with the show, and I really, like got along with it. And I think that's part of the reason why when 2 years ago I reached out to Spencer to help with the podcast before, and I also think that's why even now, 2 years later, we're in agreement, because I think before we even met each other, our visions and goals and thought process were very in line. So, it's not a surprise to me that I think a lot of the times thumbs up and 100% gets sent back and forth, because on a lot of things we agree when it comes to that kind of stuff. So
yeah, I mean, there's things that we can't agree on. There's two people on this podcast that know that Willow is a great film. There's one person that doesn't. And but as far as doing a show about Magic, Mason's bad movie taste won't come into play.
Let me say about
But I legitimately am so excited to have you guys. I think this will be fun. I'm legitimately excited. I think that our listeners are in for 3 people legitimately trying to get better at Magic and sharing that experience with people and hoping that it helps them along the way. I'm talking about what we learned and being humble, and today in our training grounds we're talking about remembering your Magic fundamentals. And a part of doing the show, I wanted to talk about things that we've struggled with in Magic fundamentals. And I think that when Mason, Trey, and myself talk about that, it's coming from a real place that we legitimately are not platinum pros that are on the in the MPL. We when we say we struggle with this, it might be something that I struggled with 2 weeks ago, and I'm trying to get through. And I hope that the humility and the honesty comes across on the show, because that's something I really want moving forward. So
Yeah, I agree.
cool. Well, let's talk about the Patreon really quickly. So, patreon.com/ccmtg. You might be like, dude, what is going on with the Patreon with all this? Because Mason had patrons, and Trey had patrons on even odds, and there were all these things about Pro Tour deck lists and stuff like that. The Patreon is going to change, and it's going to change for the better. The Patreon is going to be higher value per dollar than it is right now. So if you're coming over from even odds and you pledge a dollar amount there, you'll probably be getting really similar benefits if you pledge this same dollar amount to the show now. If you're new to the podcast and you want to wait to see what they are, we'll talk about them this week. But I just want to let people know that our current patrons and that are thinking about it, that it's just going to be better than it is currently. And we made sure when we talked that we wanted to give back to the listeners in ways that we're not right now, because our patrons are the listeners that support us, and we care and we appreciate it. So
yeah, I think when we were discussing Patreon stuff earlier today, we kind of did I did a kind of rough draft of some stuff, and Spencer gave some feedback. Nothing got cut, everything got added, right? And so I think that's kind of telling for what we're wanting to do with the patron. So
yeah,
yep.
Cool. Well, let's talk about #AlwaysImproving. #AlwaysImproving is the point of the show. We want to be doing what we can every week to be improving at Magic the Gathering. Magic is kind of a tough game, and #AlwaysImproving kind of exemplifies what we want to be doing each week, which is just finding something to get better, just finding a way to improve and implementing that, or finding something that you're doing wrong and trying to correct it. So this week, I want to talk about something that's Magic related and really personal. So I was at family dinner this week, and my little brother said, I have a coworker who said that you were really mean to a kid at a Magic tournament. And I was like, what? It was really jarring. And so I asked the name of the person, and I texted the person a kind text, and I said, hey, my brother said that you had a story about me being rude to a kid at a Magic tournament. And I just want to know who the kid was so that I can apologize and make sure that that person knows that that's not appropriate, and that whatever I did, I was really sorry. And the person messaged me back that it was about 6 years ago at a PTQ, and the second he told me about the match, I knew what match it was. And it was a match with another Utah player that's really good. I actually played him at a Grand Prix 2 Grand Prix ago. He's really good. He was really young at the time, and I remembered the match distinctly. Since then, me and this player that he's talking about have become really good friends. At one point, I would have considered us really good friends. I haven't talked to him in a while, but the thing that really stuck with me is this person said that my attitude towards him when trying to correct me had made him stop playing competitive Magic. And it was I apologized, and I talked about how I was really sorry that happened, and that wasn't appropriate, and all these things. And I'm a significantly different person now than I was 6 years ago. And I think that one of the things that we need to realize as Magic players is that when we are not even toxic, but when you tilt off, or when you get upset at a Magic tournament, or when you get upset at an opponent, it doesn't just affect your opponent. It affects the people around you, and it impacts their experience as well. And I would consider myself a pretty nice Magic player these days. I actually just don't usually tilt off. I'm very polite, cordial with my opponents. But me 6 years ago might not have been. And being willing to question why you were the way you were, correct that, and also be willing to admit a mistake that you might have made a long time ago is really important in Magic, and it applies to the game in so many different ways. But I think the most important one is to realize the impact that you make on somebody without maybe even realizing it.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. The way that you treat not only your people but yourself too in that kind of situations, you know, where you tilt off and allow yourself to get so angry about that stuff. It doesn't help you as a player. It like really only hurts you, and it really hurts your community, and it like is so much net negative. It's, you know, I'm glad to hear that it's something that's kind of behind you, and I hope that if you're listening, and I mean, because let's be honest, a lot of people have this problem with Magic, that you're able to, you know, take that words from Spencer and be like, yeah, I'm going to try and work on this, you know, because you have to start somewhere. You might as well start with your next match. So
I've been told by many people in the last 3 years that I'm their favorite opponent. So I certainly was able to correct it. And so I hope that other people know that you can too. You know, there's an episode on this podcast called Faking Positivity. I will go listen to that one. So anyway, that was my always improving moment this week. Kind of real, but I thought I'd share.
I think it's an important one. I think a lot of people can relate to that for sure. So
Mason,
or should relate to that if they aren't. How about that?
Mason, what about you?
No, sorry.
I think that everybody, if we're being honest, at some point or another, we've tilted off or we're lying to ourselves about it.
Yeah, we've all lost our cool. You know, even the best of us, and especially as someone who I don't think loses their cool very often. I've definitely lost it before. So all you can do is move on from that, and you know, have that be a learning moment for you. My always improving moment this week is about specifically the new standard format. So War of the Spark has been on Arena for, I guess, a week as of tomorrow at the time in which we're recording this. And I have a IQ this weekend, and then I have a MCQ the following weekend. So while I am, so I guess my all listeners might not know from even odd. So I'm currently in a weird spot where I have like a high-ish number of SCG points. I think I'm like number 52 or 53 on the leaderboard at the moment. And so if I have a really good SCG Kentucky and Envy, I could maybe like be in the spot for buys going into the next season and then make a run at that. I'm kind of playing that by ear. So I need to like play IQs and continue to do well with them. So I need to kind of figure out a standard deck. And I pretty early on thought that the Fog deck was good. And then I've heard from other people that the Fog deck was good. So I kind of dedicated to learning the Fog deck, the blue-green one. And the always improving moment really comes down to a sideboard. Because I think one of my strengths is early on I can identify inherently powerful strategies. But I feel like my sideboards are normally not super great. And I was working on this last format with Gates as well for the first SCG that I had to play. And I think I did a better job of that than I had in the past. And I think Trey and I spent, what was it, probably like an hour-ish, hour and a half, just talking about like 4 slots in the Fog sideboard just 2 nights ago. And then since then, I've spent more time and I've read articles and looked at people's stuff and kind of thought about how cards played out. And that's kind of been my always improving moment. It's just trying to get better, at sideboarding and coming up with sideboard plans in the early weeks. Because it's really hard to have like reasonable sideboard plans, I think, in the early weeks. Because you just don't know what's going to be around.
Yeah, and there was a good part about that when we were doing that as well that I think is a good point too, is that we had some cards that we like pretty distinctly disagreed upon. Yeah. And instead of just like bearing down on that, really digging into each other as to like why we were having the thoughts and why we were having the approaches of what the cards were, so that we could try to reach a solution as to, okay, why are we looking at these things so drastically differently in this situation? And even if we don't reach a consensus on it, at least we can try to figure out like what thought process is going into it so that we can try to figure out what the best way to approach the problems are.
Yeah, 100%. And the card he's talking about is Kefnet. We spent a lot of time talking about Kefnet.
Well, a bunch of time with Kefnet.
Yeah, I mean, a majority of it, to be honest. I'm still not sure.
Is Kefnet good enough Fog deck?
That's a good question.
Yeah. So, like, out of the sideboard, right? Like, so one of the problems that you have to kind of tackle is the blue-black decks are pretty good against a lot of stuff, but they're really bad against you. So they're all kind of playing Unborn Ego, from what I can tell right now from looking around online, looking at articles, because they're trying to stop you from nexusing or answer like one-year win conditions. So I feel like against them, you have to bring in another win condition. And Kefnet's one that stays around forever. And your deck has Opt and Chemistry, so you can draw cards on your opponent's turn to maximize the Miracle trigger off Kefnet. And Miracling like a Nexus of Fate sounds great. So it just becomes a backup win condition, basically. But like, I kind of like it because it like works well with all the spells in the deck. And Trey likes it because it's a 4/5 for 4. And he's like, it doesn't need to like draw cards, and it just never dies.
I see the old man jokes are starting early in constructed criticism history in this new era.
That wasn't even a joke. It's just
wrong, though.
Yeah.
So you take one for a 4/5 flying to kill.
Well, then that was a dagger from me.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, we spent a lot of time talking about like, because originally we had 2 Kefnets, now we're trying 1. We're doing a lot of stuff. So I won't spend the whole time talking about Kefnet, but
that's okay. I have a question for Trey before we move on to him. Where were you on Reaper of the Wilds when it was spoiled?
Wait, what does
Reaper
that
of the
card do for the
Wild?
people at home?
Reaper of the
Yeah,
Wilds. Trey, do you know?
No, go for it.
All right, Reaper of the Wilds is 2, a green, and a black for a 4/5 creature. I can't remember this off the top of my head.
Wow. 2 a green and black for a 4/5. Back in my day, that would have a drawback.
Oh no, this one had an upside, which is why everybody talked about it. It was a Gorgon. Whenever
Oh, I was here for this card.
whenever another creature dies, scry 1. You can pay a black to give it Death Touch. You can play a green and 1 to give it Hexproof. And let me tell you, all the old Magic players were talking about how good this card was going to be.
Yeah, I mean, people like a Morphling type variant card that's like, oh, it's got a bunch of stuff you can do with it for relatively low mana, and it's got abilities. It does sound nice, but I don't know. The black green's got plenty of stuff to do at that mana cost that I'm not terribly excited about it.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Trey, what about you? What did you do to improve at Magic the Gathering your life this week?
Yeah, so one of the things that I've been working on a lot, despite the fact of playing the Fog deck with Mason so that we can prepare for this event, is I can't stop myself from playing Grixis mid-range decks basically at all. And what's been really interesting with this is, so for those of you that don't know, at the end of the season, as we were toward like the dead standard, I had spent a lot of time tuning a Grixis mid-range list and had gotten it to a point that I was really happy with. And then we got all of these new cards, all of these new tools. And so I was starting to try to figure out what kind of direction it was going to take now. And what I was really like potently reminded of this week is that, okay, even though I had all of that experience playing that type of archetype, even with most of the same cards, that it still takes so many reps and so many games with that style of a deck to figure out like prioritizing like what your spells are supposed to be and prioritizing what your role is supposed to be in particular matchups. And that it's almost like even like starting from the ground up again, just because you've added a bunch of new stuff into the deck. And it's been an interesting process going through the week. And that as we're onto the tail end of the week, my win percentage has gone up drastically from just being able to correctly identify those things and to tune the deck in the right direction.
All right. Anything you want to share on it?
Ingress Rampage is the truth. That card is awesome.
That's the sacrifice one, right?
Yeah, it's the modal sack outlet that your opponent has to either sack a creature, an artifact, or a planeswalker. And that specific thing, it's like things that were always a problem for this type of deck just don't matter. Like you're playing against mono white and they play an Adanto Vanguard on 2, and it's like, great, sacrifice it. I don't care. Or they play a planeswalker and you're like, oh, I could have killed a creature, but not this. It's like, doesn't matter, just kill it. Like 2 mana, it almost always trades up for value. It does a lot of different stuff.
Killing a Adanto Vanguard actually sounds like a pretty big game because I played a lot of Grixis decks and a lot of Adanto Vanguard, and that does not sound fun.
Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, the number of times that you play like Carnival Carnage, and like even against like red decks, and like you kill their 1-drop on 1 with Carnival, you make them sack a creature on 2, and then you like Lava Coil their 3rd thing, and it's like they're pretty much just out of the game, done.
All right.
It's weird that like a really slow mid-range deck basically doesn't lose to mono red, but like it pretty much doesn't lose to mono red.
That's powerful. Mason, what were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say the fact that it's 2 mana has come up. Like we've been playtesting some from like him playing Grixis because he kind of wanted to play it at the IQ, and he wants to kind of play it at the MCQ. And so I was like throwing decks at Grixis, and one of the things that came up was like him being able to double spell, but like one of his spells answering my planeswalkers. Because even though there's a bunch of planeswalkers in the set, kind of what's happened is most decks have like 2 in them, so you can almost always just kill the planeswalker you want to kill. So you'd be like, play a bull, let's make you discard a card. All right, Ingress Rampage, you're a planeswalker, go. Like in the later turns, and that's like pretty good.
Yeah, and it's weird against the control decks because normally you would like have to choose of like siding out a bunch of removal, but then they're going to bring creatures in, and then you have all of this stuff. But with Ingress Rampage, you just leave them in, and it's like you need to hit a Thief of Sanity, great, kill it. You need to hit a Teferi, great, kill it. Like it still has value. You don't have to worry about like, I got to get rid of these lava coils. I wish I'd have had a lava coil for that thief. Like it gets to fill a lot of roles. It does a lot to like glue the deck together now.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. All right. Well, that is it for #always improving this week. But you know what is improving is our ad segment. So this week, we have a special ad for our sponsor at Oasis Games. Trey, why don't you talk about that?
Hello, fellow Magic competitor. Sure, every Friday is the door that we always run through, screaming with excitement to escape the doldrums of the work week. But this week is special. This week is your quarterly Magic Christmas. It's the War of the Spark release day. And if you're like me, and I think you are, you can't wait to spend all that hard-earned cash to fill up a kiddie pool full of new cards and slide in like a warm cardboard custard. But you're no dummy. You love a good char bargain. That's where our friends and sponsor at Oasis Games come in. MTGOasis.com is the best place to get all your cards. You can try them out now with code CCMTG for 15% off your first order. And the good news doesn't stop there, friends. You can then use code WouldThatBeGood for 4% off every order. So don't wait. Head over to MTGOasis.com today and tell them CCMTG sent you.
Y'all lost a Hall of Famer for that. You're like Hall of Fame, NPL, comedy at times.
Nonsense.
Tell me, I don't know about.
That's just a good deal, though.
It's just
That's a bargain.
How do your cards turn into custard? I don't understand.
So there's only one way to find out.
And that's to shop at Oasis Games, I guess.
Probably take a lot. Make sure that you use the code so that we know they sent you.
No, I legitimately love Oasis. They've been a sponsor of this podcast for a long time. That ain't changing anytime soon. And if you want some custard cards, they're the place to go. So, all right, let's get on to our next segment, which is Deck of the Week. Every week that we can, we want to talk about a deck that's doing well in Magic the Gathering. Well, guess what happened last week, guys?
The War of the Spark pre-release.
That's true. That's factual. I cannot tell you you're wrong. Also, Mythic Championship London happened, and it was modern, and we had humans taking that down. And so today I want to talk about the humans deck that took down the event, and kind of humans as an overall deck. So you guys did an episode of Constructed Criticism about 2 months ago. That was focused around the top 10 decks in Modern. I think about a month after the banning of what was that card called?
KCI.
Yeah, that one, KCI.
Scars heal quickly with you. I'll never forget.
The problem is that I didn't know how to say the name correctly, and I was trying to remember the abbreviation.
Cart Clan Ironworks. Yes.
Yeah.
Fallen but not forgotten.
It's probably never.
It's worth 2 mana in my heart.
Hey, that card was the last thing keeping tier 7 eggs in as a viable deck. So lots of people's hearts got broken that day.
They had to ban eggs a lot of times to ban eggs. They really tried.
And now the new Ugin makes it cost 2 less. All I'm saying.
I was there with those eggs in my hand every time.
But the tournament was taken down by humans, and on the podcast that we had talked about how humans was nowhere, gone, or no.
It's like second. I think at the second lowest points, or maybe it barely squeaked in the power rankings, but it was really low.
Yeah,
I remember that.
And since then, humans just gone up and up and up and up and up, all the way to winning the Mythic Championship. So the list that won, we have 4 Aether Vial, 4 Champion of the Parish, 4 Noble Hierarch, 3 Kitesail Freebooter, 4 Meddling Mage. Of course, you're supposed to use the Crispicula art. 4 Phantasmal Image, 4 Thalia Lieutenant, 4 Thalia Guardian of Thraben, 2 Deputy of Detention, 4 Mantis Rider, 1 Militia Bugler. We will talk about that. 4 Reflector Mage, and then, of course, the Human Land Base, which I won't read. 4 our champion.
Gold Lands and Horizon Canopy.
Yeah, there's an island and a plains in there also.
Oh yeah, my bad.
4 champion, Arak Champion, 3 Dampening Spear, 1 Gaddock Teed, 1 more Deputy of Detention, 2 Dismember, 1 is it Staticaster, 1 Militia Bugler on the board, 1 Sin Collector, and 1 Whirler Rogue. So, Mason, this deck was dead in the water. What happened? What happened?
Well, so here's the thing that I think people forget, because I've seen this on Twitter recently where people are like, "Oh, I thought spirits was better humans." Blah 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 blah. We're spirits, and what happens is that spirits is really good against like combo decks, and specifically decks like KCI where they need to tap out, and your spell quellers can really take advantage of that, and you have time to kind of develop this bigger thing while also being good in the humans matchup, having that kind of advantage. That deck left, and so the format's changed, and with the changing format, some of the top decks in the format right now are Amulet Titan, Tron, Arclight Phoenix, Dredge, And then at the Mythic Championship, we had the new London Mulligan getting tested out, and 2 of those decks, arguably 3, really improved from it. And you could say Arclight just not getting mana flooded or mana screwed is going to help the deck. And with all those things happening, Humans has a pretty good matchup against all of them, and at least they have a bearable one against Dredge post-board with the Auroch champions and being able to Meddling Mage and kind of lock them out as their game plan. And I've been told the Tron matchup versus Human matchup is like pretty even. I never played it, but all the Humans players I know say they love it. All the Tron players I know say they love it. So I imagine it's pretty even. But basically the format changed, and now Humans is a really viable deck. Another deck that's pretty great for the Mythic Championship was Grixis Death Shadow, and Humans is really good against that. So Humans just has a lot of really good matchups reappearing right now in the metagame, and people are kind of adapting, and it has just enough adaptability to answer these problems, and everything's kind of striking perfectly for Humans. Plus being proactive and modern is just good. So good game plan.
Trey, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, specifically like the Grixis Death Shadow thing, Reflector Mage is really good against Delve creatures, right? Just in general, very good. But like one of those things that's interesting, right? Like Amulet Titan is a very effective deck, right? But it's relatively light on threats. It wins with like a Primeval Titan, right? Like you put a Primeval Titan to play an attack. And so if you have ways to favorably interact with that, like Reflector Mage or other things like that, like you can get some game and buy turns while also applying like a heavy clock.
Yeah, you can name Meddling Mage in prime time, and they can beat, like Amulet Titan can beat that given enough time, but you luckily don't give people a lot of time on average.
So, right, yeah. It has like really soft disruption overall, but it doesn't need hard disruption because of like the fact that it just kills you so quickly.
I think that one of the things that people forgot is that there was a time in which Humans was just the best deck in Modern, and nothing, it didn't lose anything. So like, I just think that if you don't lose any, like, this is just my opinion about like decks like Blue-White Control, Humans, Tron, like, these are decks that as long as they don't lose something, they're just always going to be able to be viable. And you know, I think that you know, unless things change drastically, or you know, or actually that's to Human's point, is that something did change drastically. KCI got banned, Spirits got worse, the you know, everything kind of culminated in the second getting better, and then you know, it just gotta kind of really run away with it.
Well, and there's something I think that's also a good point is that, you know, one of the most played decks going into the tournament was Arclight Phoenix, right? Like it was like over 20% of the metagame for like day 2, right? And one of the things that started to happen as a result of that is the builds of those decks started to get really inbred. Like they started really skewing the choices that they were making on particular cards in order to combat the mirror match. And so like you started seeing things like they're going to play Flame Slash.
3 main deck surgical.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so now all of a sudden you have these cards that you might have had cards of traditionally that would be good against Humans in general. Like, you know, it used to be that the decks played Gut Shot as their free spell instead of Surgical. That's great against Humans. You can kill a champion, you can kill a Hierarch, you can kill a Thalia's Lieutenant. Like you can kill all of these things for no mana. But now you're playing Surgical to combat the mirror. You're playing Flame Slash, which is slower and worse in most instances, but's better against the mirror. You're playing Echoing Truth sometimes in the main deck, which is like medium against Humans. Like, and so as a result of those decks getting really inbred in the way that they're deck building in order to try to be sure that they can beat the mirror or at least compete in the mirror, then it starts to open the door for Humans to come in. And then one of the other things too on that deck list that I didn't really talk about yet is that Deputy of Detention is such a good like catch-all upgrade, right? Like one of the things that Humans had a problem with too is that they have a lot of conditional cards or whatever, but like the fact that you can like have something that can interact with all decks most of the time is something that's also like a good upgrade in the sense of that deck.
Yeah, I think another thing is I think that first of all, Phoenix is a good matchup for Humans. I don't know that like the changes recently to the Phoenix decks have helped that matchup be good, like better for them or not, but I think it was just always good against it, and I was wrong about it initially. When I've talked to John about it, when I've talked to other people about it, maybe it wasn't John, maybe it was Matt. One of them told me that they thought that, you know, Humans Just was great against the deck, and I think that initially looking at the deck lists face up, I thought that there wasn't enough disruption for Humans to disrupt Phoenix, and that it would prey on it with like just having a bunch of lightning bolts. But I don't think that's how it has played out. It's been Humans had more than enough disruption for Phoenix, and a fast enough clock to kill them.
Yeah, it felt to me like the draws where they had Thing on 2 and a Manamorphose and or Gut Shot in like the first or second turn to kill a champion, or like, pay a mana to get through a Thalia, made it a lot better. And then that kind of like skews the opinion before, and then as the deck changes and shifts, those things stop happening because humans wasn't part of it, and then we get to where you're at now. So
actually, to Trey's point, the Gut Shot change from Gut Shot to Surgical, that's huge.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, because then all of a sudden I think centered like pretty heavily around Thing in the Ice, right? Like the matchup like becomes about Thing in the Ice in a lot of ways.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Which is just probably true of the Phoenix deck. What do you think are the key matchups for this deck, Trey? Like if you were gonna go pick up humans, obviously it just took down the Pro Tour, but what matchups are you looking to hit, and then what matchups are you kind of afraid of?
I mean, I definitely want to play against Grixis Death Shadow like a bunch. Like I think that's a favorable situation to be in, because they're attacking their life total, you're attacking their life total, and they play a very small number of threats. Dredge can be tricky. Like you can win with that, but like Dredge can be tricky. Like you can go wider and bigger than they can, but they also can come pretty quickly, and Conflagrate can take your board down pretty easily too, which can be a problem. So I don't know that I would like be excited to play against Dredge a lot if I were the humans player.
That's fair. Mason, what about you? What are things that you think you want to hit that you don't want to hit?
Besides the ones Trey listed, I definitely want to hit Storm. I definitely want to hit like Amulet Titan. I think that matchup is probably slightly favored humans just because they consistently like apply minor disruption and fast clocks. And while you can answer it all with Titan, it's not feasible to consistently do it. I think another matchup I want to play is, probably Tron. Like all these, no one was like surprised when they're like, oh, there are so many Tron in the top 8. Everyone knew going into the Mythic Championship, Tron is going to be a contender. And so if you pick up humans, I have to assume you test that matchup enough to be happy playing against it, or at least not miserable. So I want to avoid decks like Esper, blue-white control, probably War Prison, and although that deck is kind of fallen off the map, and I would want to hit the expected matchups. So
yeah, I think one we didn't mention is I think that you don't want to play against Scapeshift decks. I think that they're pretty rough for humans overall. They have enough disruption that your disruption doesn't do much against them. But I think that you also don't want to play against blue-white for the most part.
I don't think that matchup's good.
And definitely not Jeskai. So
yeah,
I think that kind of breaks down my initial thoughts. I agree with most of you. I've heard that Tron is the good side of this, so it's interesting to hear you say that. It makes me want to do a constructed clash on it.
So I think Tron favored.
That's what I've heard. Is Tron is favored? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I do think that there's an indication too that there's concern from the humans player in regulation of that by the fact that you've got like so many damping spheres on the sideboard, right? Like they're looking to do something to try to impact what's going on.
Yeah, that's very fair. It's weird. I don't know. I wish I could talk to some like Tron masters and humans masters, and because like I hear from both sides that like the matchup's good. And now, to be fair, I haven't heard that in recent times. Maybe things have changed enough where that's different. But I just always hear that. And when I hear that kind of stuff a lot, it makes me think the matchup's probably pretty close to even.
Anything that really stands out to you guys on the list here? I think that I don't know if I mentioned the
Bugs.
Well, I do want to mention the Buglers. I just want to make sure that I congratulate Eli Loveman. I think we might have mentioned his name, but I just want to say, congratulations. Winning a Mythic Championship is, it's got to. There's not very many of those that have happened. So, you're in elite company.
Yeah, you're in the top 2 of all time.
yeah, you are currently a lock for the Mythic Championship Hall of Fame if it ends now. So, serious congratulations though to him. Let's talk about the Bugler really quick because this card is controversial in this deck. What
looks like this guy listens to Jerry and not Cedric. That's what I'm seeing.
Is Cedric off Bugler now?
Cedric was never on Bugle. He was always on Thalia. This is how I know you're not in touch with the Magic Twitter, because I had weeks where this was the only thing that was being talked about.
And it wasn't just by them. It was people arguing for them.
Oh, my gosh, yeah.
So
I knew that there were 2 sides to it. I'd forgotten who was aligned with what at this point.
I remember Cedric ripping a Bugler up after Ross Merriam won
That's
the
right.
PTQ. And I was there for that. And that was a moment that I'll never forget in my life. It was magical.
Well, we have two buglers in this 75, and I got to tell you guys, I played only a little bit of this deck. I played it at one tournament and then played it through some leagues with the Hinder Father,
Rest in
and
peace.
bless his soul. And I'm a fan of the Bugs, man.
Bugs is good. It finds like it lets you have like this resiliency and redundancy in your deck. It lets you find like some of your more powerful bullet cards, and also just some of your power cards too, right? Like it finds your Thalia's Lieutenants while also searching for your meddling mages, and that like lets you have one card that's very versatile and find a lot of things. It also helps you find your sideboard cards, helps you find your Deputy Attention, helps you find your Sin Collectors. It's very nice in that, and gives you game against some of the matchups we talked about. Like we don't want to play against blue white, you don't want to play against Jeskai. I assume you don't want to play against Esper Control, which is a deck that had a little surge of popularity there. And I think it's still, I think that deck, as long as Arclight Phoenix is a real deck, I'm in for Esper on control decks. And I think that's the case still. And with all that things being said, it's still weird to me because everyone knew about Tron, right? And so it's like Thalia's like the biggest thing going for Big Thalia was she's good against Tron, right? And she like kind of throws your opponents off. But if you play against Tron, you got a spike in the matchup, and not have any is really surprising to me. And I think that's also telling about what he might have thought the matchup was like.
Yeah, I don't know. I've always found Bugler to be very whelming. Like it's not bad, it's not good. Like you played and like that was kind of fine. Like I've never been particularly excited about it. I mean, probably the biggest upside to it is that it has vigilance. So if you can pump it up a little bit, like it does some stuff.
That's maybe the biggest upside.
Yeah, maybe. Like I don't know. Like I was very excited to play that card a lot, and it, at the time that it happened, I was playing a lot of humans, and I don't know. I just was never particularly excited about it. I was never mad about playing it, but I was never like that impressed with it either. Like it just felt like a thing that did okay.
You know what? We'll run 2 T-shirt campaigns for Constructed Criticism. They'll be on the swag page. I'm gonna make a Team Bug shirt and a team and an anti-Bug shirt. We'll figure out.
Team Thalia. We gotta send it to Cedric.
All right, deal. Well, sure.
Yeah.
We'll get a Team Bugs and a Team Thalia shirt. I'll find some time to get those up. But I like what Mason said. I think that you get a sideboard like this because of Militia Bugler, and like I think a sideboard like this is legitimately more powerful and really good at a tournament like the Pro Tour, where you can get very key cards and find your key cards. I think that has some value. But
yeah, I want to piggyback on that real quick before we end this. One last thing. Rest in peace, Michael Hinderrocker. One of the last things he said, I remember on the show, is he talked about how Humans is probably the best deck in Modern, except it has one weakness, is it doesn't have a sideboard. It has a collection of cards that they put there, and sometimes they bring them in, which is a bit of hyperbole, but Militia Bugler kind of does help fix that problem. So I just wanted to mention that, it, like if we believe in the Hinder Father, which, the religion,
oh no,
helps that.
Oh no! Did I just start a second cult?
You're happy to play a medium card to help find your other medium sideboard cards.
Yeah, so two bad cards making a good card that's bad deck building. 2 medium cards make another good card. A good card in matchup is Big Brain.
All right, so I did not realize I made a Hinder Father religion by calling him the Hinder Father.
Oh, the Hinder Father's had a religion for a long time in the shadows.
All right. Now we got the Cult of Manny and the Hinder Father, whatever it is.
The Church of Rocker.
Well, I think this deck has legs. I think that if we just kind of like look at what Modern is right now, I'm not gonna lie, Mason. I might consider jumping off Escape Shift for a hot minute to try this out.
Don't lie to the listeners.
What are you trying to say?
I like these bold claims, but the Church of the Rocker, just be true to yourself. And Escape Shift puts up a top one in every single top 8, and we know at the end of the day, when the chips are down, you're going to pick up the old Prime Time. I'm going to pick up Prime Time too, but I'm going to do it in a fancy way.
Yeah, that's because you've betrayed the true church to our Lord and Savior Volokut, and you've come to the false idol Primeval Titan.
Prime Time's the best card in both decks by a significant margin. And I just go where the Prime Time takes me. Aiming with Titan. Listen, How many SCG tour top 8s do I have? 1. How many times has Primordial Titan got me there? 1. Just saying. There's a reason.
All right.
Just
I can't argue with you when you just say things that are true.
Yep, that's a good plan.
Whether or not those things actually mean anything is a second problem.
Don't look into my words. Just listen to them.
Let's talk about the SCG, and let's talk about Trey. You've got an SCG top 8 also, and let's talk about something that probably took you part of the way there, and that's Magic fundamentals. So one of the first things that I knew that I wanted to do, when and if John and Seth left, was I wanted to, do something to emphasize what direction the show's going to go, with whoever I picked. And when I picked Mason and Trey, I knew what I wanted the show to be, and I believe they aligned with it. So just having the first episode with the mom just being about fundamentals, I think really hits to where we want to go with this. So for me, I think that what I want to kind of focus on is talking about what are some of the fundamentals that we've focused on in our time playing Magic. And I'll go first on that. When I first wanted to improve at Magic the Gathering, there are a few things that I kind of focused on individually. Mason actually likes to tell this story about how important I emphasize tapping your mana correctly every turn is. So don't miss tap to cause yourself to lose a game. That's when I actually legitimately had to focus on, because I'm kind of a fast player willy nilly, and I had to slow myself down and focus on that one. Mulliganing, I think that's a fundamental that we can talk about that really focuses in on, if you just create good mulligans, you give yourself plenty of opportunities to win, because people either keep bad hands or pitch good hands, and if you don't do those things, you just increase your percentages in a whole new way.
Mulliganing is super hard.
Yeah.
There's probably going to be an episode one day. I know it's been one in the past.
Yeah, we'll do it again. And I think that the third one for me is just thinking about your turns ahead of time. And when you do that, it actually makes the first one easier also. But, planning out your turns and having a plan was an episode that we did with Alexander Hain. Shout out to him for top 8ing the Pro Tour, by the way. And I think that, when you plan out your turns and have a plan, the whole game opens up in a new way. And those are kind of the 3 fundamentals that I remember being the biggest breakthroughs for me. What about you, Mason?
I'm sorry, I had never actually heard of that episode before with Hain, and a big fan of Hain, so I was downloading that on my phone. Sorry about that. It's funny too, because that was the fundamental I wanted to kind of talk about, because we're all going to pick one and talk about them, and it's something that I think is not really talked about a whole lot when someone's trying to pick up competitive Magic and they're trying to become a grinder of such. And it's when you're looking at your hand, thinking through your turn and making all those actions at once. You hear PV talk about this a lot, where he plays kind of in bursts, where he'll stop, he'll think about every action that he can that his opponent can't respond to, and sometimes he'll think about counter spells and stuff like that, and then he'll make all his actions at once. So he kind of stops, thinks about everything, makes his moves. That way he doesn't give away any information. And what happens is, if you don't play like that, and you kind of do things and figure it out as you go, sometimes you miss something. Because in your head, you're okay, I'll play this land, and then I'll do this, and then after I do that, I'm going to cast a spell, and then you go back to the first step and you play that land, but it's oh, wait, I needed to play this other land because of this mana cost. It goes back to the mistapping almost. And so think about all your actions and doing them. Excuse me, I'm so sorry there. Doing all your actions at once, I think, is one thing that I'm still trying to refine. And one thing that's great about Amulet Titan is it actually forces me to do this, is to think through and do all my actions in one movement. So yeah, that's one thing that I've really been trying to work on. And I still struggle with it. At times I'll be yeah, the play's obviously this, and it's needed to not play that land. I need to play this tap land so that next turn I could do this Nexus and win the game. So
yeah, I think it's a lot easier to find that specific one when you're playing a deck that punishes you when you don't. I think that I think most ramp decks are that way, for what it's worth. A lot of people are ramp decks are so easy, you just play ramp spells and then you win all of a sudden. And actually sequencing becomes really, really important in those decks, and when you do it wrong, you basically lose 100% of the time. And I think that if you're playing a deck like uh, what is Death Shadow, sorry, I think that deck also gets punished really hard when it makes sequencing errors, when it makes errors in the form of not knowing your plan going through a turn. Just cycling a Street Wraith to cycle it is awesome, but like also know what you're looking for off of your Street Wraith bobble combos and like stuff like that.
Yeah, who to bobble, when to fetch, how to fetch, all that kind of stuff. I think that's all very true. I think Spirits was a similar way, and I also think that's why PV was so part of the reason. I mean, he's also obviously just a master, but like that deck also rewarded that thing, and that's one that I hear him talk about a lot. So,
Trey, what about you?
So, mulliganing was something that I was going to talk to you, but it's something we could also talk about for like an hour.
Yeah, well, let's talk about what makes it a fundamental, though. Like, what did you struggle with, or what do you think people struggle with it?
So I know that one of the things that was a breakthrough moment for me when looking at mulliganing was, you got into the point, like I was initially just looking at like whether or not I could cast things. Like, did I have lands and spells, or did I have like all my colors if I'm playing like a 3-color deck or something like that? Being like, okay, I'm going to draw these other things. And then like having the realization that like I needed to be making a decision more on, do I have a plan of how this hand is going to win the game versus can I just play stuff? And that was a big like moment as far as like, looking at it from a fundamental standpoint, and the impact that had overall on like my game performance and everything else of like, okay, I may only have a 2-lander and I have a bunch of 3-drops and everything else, but so what? Like there's a sequence of things that I know what I'm going to play, can think through of like how this hand is going to win the game, or I might have one where I can cast all my spells, but so the spells aren't going to do anything. Like this is not a hand that is structured in a way that can actually reasonably win a game. And thinking about things in that way and not thinking about them in just in the way of like, can I cast my stuff or not?
Yeah, I think sculpting a plan around what your opening hand is and then adjusting is like that next level thing, right? Like the sculpting your plan around your initial hand is the fundamental that you need to gain in order to be able to adjust as you draw cards throughout the game.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a thing of like, even when we start to realize as players that you need a plan, like you're talking about like having a plan for your turn or having a plan as you're like thinking about things in burst. And then like realizing that you need to have a plan like at the moment before the game has started, really, like when you're considering what your opening hand is. And that's one that was slower for me to realize. Like that was something that took work to like have that realization that like, oh, I need to be already doing that.
Yeah, if I can add something to that real quick. You said something that's kind of funny. It's like you said before the game even begins when you're looking at your opening hand. And I know that you don't think this way because, I know you very well. But I think a lot of people don't think of that as part of the game. They're just like, oh, I'm going to be allowed to participate with this hand, when they're first starting out. And that's a fundamental, that you talk about there. But the game starts the moment that, you look at your 7 cards.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you there, Spencer.
Oh, no, I agree. I think that I think it starts before that. I think it starts when you submit your deck. So
yeah, my favorite quote I ever said on old DC is, "I outplayed you at the start of the game when I picked this deck." And we were talking to Casey about ramp decks.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And then one of the other things that I wanted to talk about as far as fundamentals are concerned, and I think it's a place where I see big variations among players, is combat math. Is that one thing that I see happen a lot is somebody will have, several creatures in play and that they're ahead on life and they're really like putting their opponent on the back foot. Then your opponent plays one big creature and then they just stop attacking, just freeze. And it's like, well, if I attack, I'm going to lose this resource and whatever. And then the next turn, that person plays another big creature and another big creature. And then all of a sudden now you're out of the game. Where like, if you would have just continued applying pressure and looking at just as what the life total race was, is that they had no reasonable way of catching up other than you just like let them off the hook because of being scared of like losing out on the things that you have, as opposed to looking at it of like trying to finish the game out using what resources you have available to you.
I think that the other thing, and this kind of brings us to our next point even, which we can talk about, but people avoid combat math. They're like, I actively don't want to participate in this, so you can do that. And it's like, that's fine.
Chief.
Right.
I don't know if that helps you get better at it. I think that people also like to avoid things that they're bad at. So
Mhm.
one of the things that like we as humans do is we tend to rely on our strengths because that's human nature, right? Like we want to, it's live or die evolution wise, and so relying on your strengths has gotten our ancestors through issue again and again and again. And honestly, when you think about like what you're participating when you're participating in a competitive game, is your brain is going to react the same way. And so it's going to rely on the things that you're good at when you prepare for a tournament. It's why so many people call themselves aggro players or call themselves control players. It's because they rely on their strengths in order to compete. Um, and I think that when you look at Magic fundamentals, people avoid the things that they're bad at and then try and get really good at the things that they're good at. When it's kind of important just to remember to get good at all of the fundamentals first.
Yeah, absolutely. You get into the thing of like specializing in your area or like increasing your range, and that like kind of specializing in your area is like a starting point, and then working towards on increasing your range is how you're going to start to level up and move into like getting better even in what you thought your strength was by having a better understanding of the aspects of your game that you weren't very good at.
I agree
And
100%.
You agree
there's
100%.
yeah. There was one more fundamental thing that I don't want to leave the control players out in the out on the porch as we're talking about these things. But one thing that I've seen a lot, and I've had a lot of discussions with players about, is with counterspells. And from a fundamental standpoint of like, you should be thinking ahead of time, like what it is that's going on. And if you have counters in your hand, or even if you don't, making a decision about like what spells you anticipate and whether or not you would counter them before they're ever on the stack. And then that way you're not leaking information or bleeding information by like going into the tank on every spell. And then it's like, okay, well, they obviously have something, so I'm going to play around this or play around that. But like, if you've made decisions about what you think is something that you need to counter, or whether or not you have other ways to deal with whatever that is prior to the time that that spell's on the stack, then you get to dictate what information you're providing to your opponent. Because then you can use it to your advantage either way. You can go in the tank as a bluff. You can go in the tank if you need to evaluate something, but you can also just be like snap resolves, because you've already decided ahead of time that that's not important.
Yeah, this is something that I, for a long time, didn't understand control. I think I've talked about this on the podcast, but like I didn't understand playing control decks. I was like always playing mid range and ramp decks, and then one day I was just like, you know what, I'm gonna figure it out. And I just played control after control after control after control after control, to the point where people called me blue white guy for a little while. People named Mason, and like
Over snake guy. Can't trick me.
forever snake guy. That was
Yeah.
that was after Jeskai control. I'm pretty sure.
I think it was, yeah.
I might have won a PPTQ with Jeskai control while you called me snake guy though, so I don't know. But I think that it's about this. Like this is always improving, right? This is the thing that will take you from I'm really good at reading my opponents to I'm really good at playing Magic and reading my opponents. And like that's a much better place to be if you want to win a Magic tournament.
I want to tell a very short story if I can from a game that I had today.
Yeah.
I was playing against Esper Control, and as the result of a search for Escanta activation, I knew that they had a Dovin's Veto in hand. So it's the blue-white counter-target non-creature spell, and it can't be countered. And so they had a Teferi in play, they were ticking up, they were doing things, and so I was having to try to manipulate my turns to get to the point that I could play around or at least bait out this Dovin's Veto that I knew that they had. The game went on for like 6 more turns. They answered everything that I did in one way or another, whether it was Mortify, Vraska's Contempt, Absorb, something else. They just left that Dovin's Veto that I could see in their hand the whole game. It was the most demoralizing thing that I've ever had to deal with, is playing against control, and it was a great example of like making a decision ahead of time of what was going to matter. It's like if you had other answers to things other than that, then they were utilizing those answers, right?
I had this,
and as opposed to like the typical response would be like the first thing you'd do is like, we'll just use the thing they know about.
yeah, I had the similar thing happen to me today on Arena where I needed to get the Dovin's Veto out of my opponent's hand, and they played Mortify instead of Dovin's Veto, and I was like, I'm pretty sure I just lost.
Yeah, it's demoralizing.
I had a thing happen earlier today too, where I was playing the Fog Mirror and I had Narset's Reversal in hand, and I was pretty sure my opponent was like inexperienced in the matchup, and they were waiting for me to do something to Nexus of Fate, and so I played a Growth Spiral tapping down to 2 mana, and they cast a Nexus in response with no mana, and I Narset's Reversal it to get a copy, and I was like, ooh, my turn. Yeah.
I like that our stories were times that we got boned by these control players, and you're like, oh, here's this guy outsmarted this guy on this mirror.
I'm sorry, I don't know what's losing like, so
Yeah.
my stories come from from the heart. And
you and I will bring the humility, Trey. So how to kind of wrap this up? How do you figure out when there's a fundamental you need to work on, Mason?
Yeah, so normally I think this comes back to looking at it from like an always improving aspect, right? Because if you never look at things that you can be doing better, and you only focus on the things you're good at, you'll never want to work on anything because you're focusing on the stuff you're already good at. And so there's no reason to look at stuff. But if you're trying to really improve at Magic and really grow and really, get better at the game, then you're going to notice things that keep happening to you and these weaknesses you have if you're looking at yourself with a critical eye. And that is a moment where you can do that kind of stuff. Another example is just listening, I think, to like what people say and talk about like on podcasts and articles like this. And if you're like, oh, I don't think of it like that, or I don't do stuff like that, or oh, that never occurred to me, that might be the the kick in the butt to be like, I should do this. If it never like occurs to you to make all your actions at once, well, start thinking like that, and start trying to work on it like that. So that's one way that I know. What about you, Spencer?
Yeah, for me, I've the thing is I was one of those people that relied very, 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 very heavily on their like a specific skill for a long time, and that was reading my opponents was like the thing. Like it was just something that I don't know why I was good at it. It's something I've never been able to like teach to my friends, but it's something that Matt has always credited me with being really good at, and I just relied on it way too much for a long time, to the point where like I started keeping really bad hands, to the point where like I started doing things incorrectly because I always thought I was just gonna get lucky and like be able to like outsmart my opponent, and at some point you're just not the smartest guy in the room anymore, and you've got to find out what you can do to compensate for that, so to speak. And for me, it was, learning to mulligan better. It was learning to tap my mana correctly, to slow down, and to think so that I could, try and outthink my opponent. And I think the first step is, for me, has always been, like, realizing there's something that is lacking in my game and, like, being honest with myself about it. So, like, a good example of this is I've been playing Lucas Faley's Mono Red deck a lot lately because I literally don't understand it, and I'm undefeated with it, so... it's really good, but like I looked at the deck list, I was like, I don't get this. Like, how does this deck function after post-board games? And so I've been playing a lot of that, and I think one of the things for me has always been to practice what I'm preaching on the show, and when I see that I don't understand something, I just have decided that that's not something that I can accept, and I'm going to go try and understand it. And it's made finding those moments for me a lot easier when I'm just willing to admit that I don't know something.
Yeah, that's one thing about me that I probably should have mentioned too, is that I don't like when I'm like really bad at something, I don't understand something. So that like is one of the driving factors for me to like get better at a fundamental.
It's really funny. I sent Mason this video like 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, of the craziest Falco player on Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, and like this video has this character that like keeps jumping off of a wall and smashing people down to win on this Smash Bros. Ultimate game. And Mason had tried to play Falco before and played him very, very poorly. And after seeing this video, Mason's like, doesn't that just... I was like, isn't that crazy? And Mason's like, doesn't that just make you want to play Falco? And Captain Falcon? And I was like, no, not really. And Mason just like now has just dedicated hours and hours of his life to learning how to down smash people with Captain Falcon.
Yeah. It was a thing too where it's like Spencer was like responding no as I'm typing on YouTube. how to play Captain Falcon. I'm like on my iPhone in bed, I'm like, how to play Captain Falcon. The message popped up at the top that's like, no. And I'm like, oh, I am. Click. And yeah, and now I would say is like probably one of my better characters, and it's also helped me improve at the game. Where before, I don't know how many people play Smash or Melee, but if you don't, I think it's one of the best viewing esport games of all time, and you should do it. You should go check up the Melee documentary on YouTube. I'm sure we'll talk about that in a future episode. But the thing that I was bad at was like kind of this fundamental of the game, which is playing off stage, because the game has a stage, and unlike other fighting games, it has these empty pits, but you can jump off them and get back to stage. And I was always afraid of dying. But because Captain Falcon needs to get off stage to get people, I'm now better at the game, and I've improved that fundamental by approaching things from a different angle, which I think is another, like, that's a great thing that we hadn't, I don't think, really said, is like, if you think you're having a problem with something, tackling something from a new angle can be a way to fix that problem.
Yeah, like, I think a good example of that is, there was weeks and weeks and weeks on the podcast where I just couldn't beat Burn with Scape Shift. And I would talk about it on the podcast, and I literally said on the podcast, I said, I'm not going to lose to Burn again. And I think that I'm like 13-1 against Burn with Scape Shift since then. And all that happened is I sat down and questioned everything I knew about the matchup, talked to Burn players, talked to Scape Shift players, jammed a bunch of games within a Burn player to like figure out that matchup, figure out what cyber cards actually worked, what hands I could reasonably keep. And what I learned in all of that was that I was trying to combo out against them, and I was always a turn too slow. So like I'd have these turn 4 hands, or these turn 5 hands, and it's just like just a little bit too slow against Burn, just a little bit too slow against Burn. And I never thought that, like, the truth is that I'm like a gain life control deck that's like trying to disrupt them and then just play a Bailoff, attack them 3 times, and then they run out of resources because they have to deal with the Bailoff. Like, it didn't occur to me that that's the game was played. It was either I have a Bailoff or I'm going all in on Scape Shift, not to construct the game around me having 7 lands in play naturally. And I think that you only get that through practicing your fundamentals, practicing questioning, and kind of going through a loop on that.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
So, the main thing that I wanted to add to this whole discussion as far as talking about fundamentals is trying to track your in-game situations and not just looking at the result of what the games are. And so, like, let's say you have a turn where you have to make a particularly close call and you're not sure what removal spell to use, or you're not sure whether or not you want to use your mana into turn, or whether or not you want to try to set up the double spell, or like whatever the particular decision point is. And then you make a choice and you do that. Keep track of what that choice was in your head. Like, you don't have to sit there and dwell upon it, but like later, if depending on what the result of the game was or what happened in the subsequent turns, like, say, for a good example would be like you have a removal spell at end of turn and a sweeper, and you don't use the spot removal spell because you're trying to set up for something later. And then you end up dying to something with the wrong type of spot removal spell in your hand that you could have gotten value on earlier. It's like, well, was that decision a valuable decision when you made it, or could you have gained points by making the alternate decision later? And what you can do by doing that and tracking those moments in the game is start seeing whether or not a pattern emerges. Like, are you consistently making a decision that, when you go back and look at it, is coming up on the wrong side of things? And then if you do that, then you can identify that may be a leak in your fundamentals, or maybe a leak in your game that you need to try to address. But if you're only tracking what the results of the matches are and not tracking those individual moments, then you're not going to be able to reach those conclusions.
Yeah, that's a totally fair point. Cool. Anything else that you guys want to add before we move on?
Not particularly, no. This is something you can talk about a whole lot, but we're running kind of longer because the beginning parts, I'm trying to keep it contained.
Yeah, I think we can do individual podcasts on like the main ones, but I just wanted to do one that was like just to remember them and to talk about them a little bit. So, if you're, go ahead, Trey.
Well, the last thing I would say is, for using any kind of a sports comparison, like, there's never a point that you move past this in your game. Like in professional sports, like, say, for example, in the NFL, if those NFL players have a bad game or they have a bad tackling day or something like that, then what happens at the next practice is they've got to go back and run drills like they're in Pee Wee football. Like, they go back to, like, we have to go and build it back up from the very basics to remember what it is that you're supposed to do. So no matter how good you get at the game or how experienced you have been or how long you've been playing, like, there are times that you need to go back and freshen up on these things all the time.
Awesome. Mason, football's the one with the white stripes on the green field that they throw in
I know
and
the
run.
footballs. We have the Predators in Nashville. I'm aware.
furious.
All right. If you want to find me, you can find me at Spence.
I'm so funny. Keep going.
If you want to find me, you can find me at Spencer13H. You can find Trey at TreyMC. And again, Mason at Mason E. Clark on Twitter. You can find the show at CCMTG. You can like us on Facebook on Constructed Criticism. You can go to patreon.com/CCMTG. To become a patron of the show, starting at $1 per month, anything that you can donate, it means a lot. This show's going to be free, and we're going to, kick stuff back to the people that support us. But I'm really excited about the future of the show. And I hope that this episode did a good job of explaining, what the future could look like. So, don't forget to share our sponsor at Wasted Games. And then, Mason, I want to talk to you about something before we say goodbye.
Hit me with your best shot. Do.
Oh, this is not funny, though.
Oh, yikes.
Yeah, so I'm really sad, and I wanted to share some words with the listeners. For those who don't know, the state championship block behind me, the year I won states in 2012, there was a player that had been DQ'd from a Magic event for bribing their opponents, and the person that the judge had talked to about the bribery that witnessed it was me. And so the player blamed me for the fact that they had been DQ'd from the tournament and were under investigation for a banning. And so they told the semifinals opponent and the other semifinals after my opponent and I ended that I had bribed my opponent in the finals. And I got out across the whole state that I was this big cheater and like a total scumbag, and it followed me for years and years and years. And it was really hurtful because it wasn't true. And, I've always looked up to Paulo, for example, for, when he started out, people accused him from cheating, unfairly, and, he proved him wrong, and he's probably the first or second best player of all time now. And Yuya Watanabe, for me, was another one of those players that I believed had been falsely accused of cheating because of racial reasons. And I'm really crushed by what happened at this Mythic Championship. And I hope that, in addition to my Always Improving segment, people realize the impact that they have on the people around them and the people that look up to them. Because I looked up to Yuya a lot, and I'm really hurt. And I hope that as you get better at Magic, that you never feel this kind of pressure where you need to be doing this kind of stuff, because it's not worth the dollars. It's not worth the moment of satisfaction in exchange for like the people that you let down when you get caught. Because this is like one of the best 10 players of all time. And I'm going to cry on this podcast. I'm like legitimately hurt. And I hope people know the impact that they have on people around them in the community. And when you do something that discredits you, discredits professional Magic, discredits competitive Magic, and makes it hard for people to trust, the integrity of Magic, it's really bad. So
yeah, and it can get upsetting. There's a thing that I often hear from casual players is that anytime something like this happens, they go, "Well, of course, all competitive players cheat," and it's that is the mentality that's there. And then every time a high-profile player is involved in something like this, what it does is it reinforces that negativity. And it allows them to then say another example of like, here's another example. Of course, they all cheat. Everyone cheats. And so that becomes a thing that they think that if they're going to try to switch from a casual player to a competitive player, that they need to emulate because they've been inundated with that for so long. And it is extremely upsetting for a lot of different reasons.
Mason, say something funny.
I mean, I thought it was pretty funny that the sleeves got posted as if that was going to help. But
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. That's the funniest thing I can think of. I can't be funny on demand.
No, it's fine. I appreciate you trying there. Like,
yeah,
I'm really sad.
Yeah.
So
it sucks. It's not cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that's all born out of too. Like that's born out of it because you care about the game, right? It means a lot to us all, and that those things have a larger effect than just what happens in an individual tournament.
Yeah, and I hope that as I try and improve, that I can learn from this, and like always remember that, like, just remember how I feel, and hold that with me, and as I try to keep the integrity of the game. So I hope that we can all learn from this and be a better Magic community next time. So that's it for this week. We'll see you guys all next week for another episode of Constructed Criticism.
Magic, 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 magic.